Okay, so today we had the spring budget, and I will level with you. I was expecting there to be a much bigger announcement than we saw today. We saw stuff that was only really moving around the edges, but I do think there is some detail that we need to go over in relation to not only the changes to the ISA system, also just a few things that could be a bit of a signpost for future things to be concerned about as far as investing in the UK and how that might impact your pension. But before we go into that, I just want to go into kind of the economic data prior to this and what we've had from the OBR. So I'm just going to bring up very quickly what this is from the Resolution Foundation, which is effectively showing what we know globally, which is inflation globally is falling faster than was initially expected. That potentially is a good thing, because ultimately less sticky inflation means that it's likely the interest rates can come down quicker and there can be more relief economically, because at the end of the day, it makes it harder for people to spend, and ultimately that really impacts people's pockets, especially when we've seen a cost of living crisis and all the rest of it. And if we have a look at what are the contributors to this inflation falling, you can see that it's the gas and electricity bills which are actually disinflationary. You can still see that there's a lot of contributors to this which are a lot more sticky though. And even though inflation is expected to drop and likely to be closer to the Bank of England's target of 2%, because remember, all the inflation that has been baked into those high increases is still going to affect you day in and day out. And there is no better graph that I can show you than this, which is from the OBR. Now, the good news, if I can say that, is that ultimately people are likely to be better off than we originally thought. So this dotted line is the pre-pandemic real disposable income per person. So it's a pretty good idea of when adjusting for inflation, how much disposable income does somebody have? And in the dotted line is the pre-pandemic peak. And as you can see, what we thought from 2023 was that it would take all the way up to 2027, 2028 to get back to pre-pandemic levels. Now, the most recent data is showing a more optimistic view, which actually towards the end of 2024, 2025, we are expecting real disposable incomes to pick up. So that as a sign is potentially good news. But it can't have just been me that was expecting bigger announcements, especially for a pre-election budget. So what were the takeaways? Well, look, national insurance is going to get cut by 2% or 2p. That impacts not only the employed, but self-employed. I'm not sure whether people will necessarily really feel the impact of that. National insurance as a taxation isn't as well understood, and I'm not sure whether people will necessarily interpret that as a huge benefit. One of the things that I do think did need changing, and I certainly welcomed, was the child benefit thresholds that were raised. So what's going to happen is, the way child benefit works is that if anyone in your household earns over a certain amount, currently at 50,000, then what happens is all the way up to 60,000, your child benefit gets tapered away. And at 60,000, child benefit is removed entirely. This can cause real problems, especially for people who are in a single household and looking after a child, because it can mean that basically two individuals who have income of 50,000 would basically have no reduction to child benefit. But yet if there was a single parent earning 60,000, they would get no child benefit whatsoever. And this means now effectively from 60,000, there is no taper, and the taper is going to go all the way to 80,000. So there'll be quite a few people who potentially benefit from that. Other announcements and tax cuts mean a reduction in capital gains tax from 28% to 24% on sale of a second property if you're in the higher rate of income tax for that. A fuel duty freeze, alcohol duty freeze, and also more expensing relief for business and some changes to VAT. None of that I'm going to go into in detail. And I think it's just important to recognize that none of this is kind of really headline grabbing stuff. This is all kind of around the edges of the tax system. Okay, so who got hit on the other side with tax rises? Well, look, furnished holiday lets, I have some clients happen to have them, and their tax perks for that appear to be getting scrapped. Stamp duty relief on multiple purchases. I won't go into that. It doesn't really apply to many people, but that's going to get scrapped. In somewhat of a political thing, I'm sure, non-dom tax status is going to get, as well as oil and gas windfall tax to be extended. The big thing, though, that I do want to go over is the British ISA. So the current ISA allowance for stocks and shares, lifetime ISA, cash ISA is cumulatively 20,000 per individual. That is now going to be extended. The consultation is in June though, so who knows whether it's going to stay, to £5,000, assuming you're investing in UK securities. Okay, so let's go over some pros and cons in relation to that. Well, firstly, let's have a look at the cyclically adjusted price to earnings ratio. Now, what this is effectively the price to earnings ratio gives us an idea of how expensive a market is. Effectively, the price you're paying for the stocks compared to their earnings, their price divided by their earnings. And it gives us an idea of what is the valuation, how much are you paying for each pound of earnings by purchasing the stock of a certain market. So what the cyclically adjusted price to earnings ratio does is it averages over 10 years. And that basically means it smooths out economic peaks and contractions and gives us an idea over a larger period of time whether the market is expensive or not. And if I have a look and bring up this data from Barclays, you can see that the UK, as far as a cyclically adjusted price to earnings ratio, is effectively half the US. So if you do believe that valuations signal a great time to invest, objectively, the UK is cheap. There is no two ways about it. But should you look at changing your asset allocation to the UK just because it's cheap? Well, it depends on what your goals are and what's important to you, and also what time horizon you're looking at. It's important to bear in mind that the UK is around 4% of global market capitalization. So in overweighting the UK, you are effectively making a call that you believe that the UK should be overweight in your portfolio, that you're going to get a higher return. Now, on a valuation framework, there is a case for that, there really is. But what I really don't like is I don't like the idea of the UK government forcing you to invest. And actually, I could see there being a position where not only the current government, but maybe even the next government does decide to force you to a percentage to invest in UK equities. If I take one of the details from the spring budget, it says, look, across the pension industry as a whole, the best data suggests investment into UK equities has fallen to around 6%. To improve data on current holdings, the government intends to bring forward requirements for defined benefit pensions to publicly disclose the breakdown of these asset allocations. And then here's the crucial bit. The government will review what further action should be taken if this data does not demonstrate that UK allocations are increasing. That is huge. So they've basically said that they want to ensure that UK allocations in securities, in pensions and otherwise are increased. And the bottom line is they do to an extent hold the key here. They could effectively say, my bat, my ball. If you want tax relief, you are going to have to invest a certain amount in the UK. And here's the thing. The UK is historically potentially undervalued right now. So there is an investment case for this. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to invest in the UK. What I don't like is I don't like the idea of the government potentially forcing people to do that, because I think when we've got a savings gap for retirement, the government forcing your asset allocation is not going to lead to good outcomes. And my question would be, ultimately, what is our priority? Is our priority making sure people have freedom, choice, and fund their retirement appropriately with investment that's right for them and well diversified, or is it to prop up the UK economy? Put simply, is it not the government's job to ensure that we're increasing productivity so UK equities are attractive, not necessarily forcing everyone to invest in UK equities because they are unattractive? It's important to bear in mind as well that data from the government themselves, admittedly back to 2017-2018, showed that only 21% of people actually filled their cash ISAs, because people don't have 20 grand of disposable income in general, especially in a cost of living crisis. So the British ISA, whichever way we say it, is pretty pointless for the vast majority of people. You could also make the case for the British ISA that, let's say that you forced people to put £5,000 to a British ISA. There is absolutely no reason, if they're well advised or intentional, why they can't offset that allocation in other bits of the portfolio. So really, very simply, you could have one fund which, because it's a British ISA, requires you to have a British allocation, and then within the rest of your ISA portfolio, you could effectively have an ex-UK allocation, which from the government's standpoint and what they're trying to encourage sort of defeats the point, which shows that it can be quite easily gamed and it doesn't really seem to actually fulfill any purpose. Oh hey, one thing just really quickly, there have been some significant changes in relation to the abolished lifetime allowance, and on Monday, as in this Monday the 11th at 6 p.m, me and Andrew, who is a technical specialist from Nucleus, are going to be doing a webinar around those changes. Basically, anyone who has a pension pot above about 500,000, I think potentially is going to be impacted by these changes. There's a host of complicated rules. So what we've done is we've put together a webinar to try and help and assist with that. And at the end of it, you can get access to a retirement ready quiz where you can get an idea of how on track you are for retirement. Anyway, if it does sound interesting and you do have some time on Monday, the link is in the bottom where you can have a look at joining. Hope to see you there. Thanks. So what do you think? Do you think the changes in the budget were worthwhile? Do you think they are going to have any impact? Or were you somewhat disappointed? But there was hidden within the OBR statement was also this in relation to tax drag. And if I'm being completely honest, I think it really is the tax freezing, the tax drag, whatever you want to call it, which is having the biggest impact on people on a day-to-day basis. The fact that the freezing of personal allowances deliver about £7 billion in extra revenue for each additional year that the freeze is there. People are being hit very hard by the cost of living crisis, and ultimately moving around the edges and making minor tweaks to certain bits of the tax structure don't appear to deliver the wholesale change that I think many people would be looking for. What are your thoughts? Put it in the comments. Thank you.